It's really great to see so many people really engaged with this very important issue. And I think this certainly has increased importance right now as the student body votes this week on this referendum to boycott products that are produced in illegal Israeli settlements. It's such a pleasure to join Dr. Nasser Najad and Professor Seifert. I have immense respect for them and the stance they've taken on this issue. So we are here to have a more in-depth discussion about this particular referendum. But before we move into that discussion, I think it's really important that we have a bit of a talk about and to think about boycott itself. What it means, what it is, how and why it has been successfully utilized in the past, and why we think it's necessary, both morally and strategically, to implement a boycott in this particular situation, which is what we've asked the student field to do. So the first question I think that we must address when we ask what is boycott is that very simple question itself. What is boycott? And boycott is a non-violent strategic action that we can utilize at the grassroots level. So it's very unique. It's a tool that we should cherish, really. It's used to affect social change in a situation that we have deemed to be illegal, immoral, unfair, or all of the above, which is an impetus for this particular referendum. We have decided that Israel's ongoing construction and maintenance of illegal settlements in the West Bank is unfair, it's unjust, it's illegal under international law. And as members of the international community, we have chosen to implement a boycott in order to address that issue. But very, very basic things to understand about boycott that I think are often misunderstood. Boycott is a tactic. It's a political tactic. It's not a principle. So it's not a means. It is not an end in itself. It's a means to an end. So we cannot simply just boycott something we disagree with and expect it to change. We have to, and we can, and we must in certain circumstances, utilize boycott in conjunction with other strategies in order to affect the social change that we seek. We are interested in changing Israeli policy through this boycott, nothing more and nothing less, but we will need to do this in conjunction with other groups working on other campaigns using other tactics around the world. Another thing about boycott that's commonly misunderstood is that using boycott in one context does not obligate someone to use that same tactic in every other political context. So in simpler terms, if you have a leaky sink in your flat or your apartment, and you use a monkey wrench to fix that sink, that doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to use a monkey wrench to fix everything in your house, right? If you have a hole in the wall, and you go and wave a monkey wrench in front of it, then you're probably not going to get very far. Different tools are needed in different contexts. Boycott happens to be effective in this particular context, and that's why we've chosen to utilize it. So now that we have a bit of a better understanding of what boycott is, I think it's important that we examine why we are asking the student field to use this particular tactic in boycotting settlement products. And the answer is fairly simple to me and many, and it's because Palestinian civil society has asked us to do this. So in 2005, a call was made to the international community to engage in widespread boycott, divestment, and sanctions campaigns until Israel meets the following demands that are listed on the screen here. One is ending its occupation and colonization of all Arab lands and dismantling the separation wall. The second is recognizing the full fundamental rights of Arab Palestinian citizens of Israel to full equality, and respecting, protecting, and promoting the rights of Palestinian refugees to return to their homes, as stipulated in UN Resolution 194. These are the demands of the BDS movement. Quite often these are mischaracterized, but this is the written document, this is what we need to be focusing on when we talk about this movement. So in short, the call for boycott is a rights-based, non-violent tactic to ensure equality for all people living in historic Palestine, in Israel and Palestine, between the river and the sea, however you want to characterize it, regardless of their race, religion, nationality, or any other factor. This call for boycott has been endorsed by over 170 members, organizations of Palestinian civil society, and this is indicative of the immense popular support that the call for boycott has received amongst the Palestinian population. So in their anti-boycott campaign material, those who oppose this referendum claim to do so mainly out of concern for Palestinian workers. This is a quote from their material, which reads, "It may be difficult to accept, but this boycott will do more harm than good for the Palestinian cause, and we should look into other ways to promote the human rights and statehood of the Palestinian people." This is their stance. They also cite potential harm to Palestinian workers as their main point of opposition, and this is actually one of the flyers that's been circulated by the opposition this week. As you can see, they are using the Palestinian flag to purport that a vote against this boycott is actually in support of Palestinians. I think we really need to challenge this position, and first we have to ask, are there any specific details offered to substantiate the idea that this boycott will harm Palestinian workers outside of this sort of abstract doomsday scenario that's presented in material like this? And to be honest, I have not seen any. These arguments are also fairly common. They were used very often during the boycott campaigns against the apartheid South African regime. You can see a couple of examples here. So this idea that they were deployed by anti-boycott organizations arguing that a boycott of Afrikaner-owned corporations would destroy the life of black South Africans. Here's another one here. In the end, the apartheid regime has ceased, and no catastrophic event has, afflicted South Africa. People weren't, thrown into the ocean. The only result was that the white South African population was forced to relinquish the privilege that allowed them to legally dominate another ethnic group. And this is what is also necessary in Israel and occupied Palestinian territories. And secondly, we must recognize that the absolute greatest threat to economic development in the Palestinian territories is the Israeli occupation. 150,000 Palestinians live in Area C of the West Bank, but more than 99% of the land in Area C is closed to Palestinian development, while 68% or more is reserved for illegal Israeli settlement, use, and expansion, which is a policy that's enforced by the Israeli military and militarized bulldozers. According to numerous World Bank reports, the chief impediment to Palestinian economic growth is the Israeli occupation, which have, quote, constrained growth, investment, and consequently job creation. That's just the West Bank. As far as Gaza, of course, there are, thousands of examples of how the Israeli siege has completely decimated the Gazan economy. A quote from a WikiLeaks document that was a cable between Israeli and American embassies, quote, as part of their overall embargo plan against Gaza, Israeli officials have confirmed on multiple occasions that they intend to keep the Gazan economy on the brink of collapse without quite pushing it over the edge. This is the language used by Israel when describing the Palestinian economy in Gaza. If those in opposition to this boycott are concerned with hypothetical future threats to the Palestinian economy that may or may not be caused by this boycott, should they not be even more concerned over the actual, present, years-long, man-made, and deliberate obstruction to Palestinian economic development on behalf of Israel? This is the question I would pose to the opposition. Most importantly, though, I think, than all of this, is that we must acknowledge that this argument is the epitome of the colonial mindset. For the opposition to determine, as non-Palestinians, that they actually know what is best for Palestinians, I completely reject this notion. I hope people in this room do too. And I actually call on the opposition that has printed material such as this to apologize publicly and to end this attempt to speak on behalf of all Palestinians. If any of the members of the opposition are here that have been involved in this production, please feel free to do so at your earliest convenience. As I mentioned, this call for boycott has been signed by hundreds of members of Palestinian civil society, organizations, groups. Some of their names are appearing on the screen now. And these are the organizations that have supported the boycott, and these are the organizations that we need to listen to. We need to tell the opposition to allow Palestinians to speak for themselves. The list goes on and on, there's hundreds. In closing, there are very basic realities to be found on the ground in the current situation. Since the signing of the Oslo Accords, which was supposed to be the shining moment of the peace process, where Israel would relinquish more and more control over the West Bank to the Palestinians, etc., over 200,000 additional settlers have been moved into the West Bank. Those who oppose this referendum, who oppose this boycott, will purport to be seeking peace in the region. The difference is that they do not offer a single concrete step that we can take in order to achieve this peace. Speaking about peace in general terms is an easy gesture that may seem to satisfy so-called progressive sensibilities, but some empty and abstract notion of peace does nothing for Palestinians that live under occupation on a daily basis. We must stand up to the status quo, which demands of us, as of now, that we defer to a peace process that has accomplished exactly nothing in several decades since it has been employed as the only means for change. And in the meantime, the daily brutalization of Palestinians carries on, as Israel continues to appropriate more Palestinian land in clear violation of international law and the basic principles of human rights. We will no longer defer to this peace process. We just won't do it anymore. We have the ability to make a substantial change in this issue, and we need to utilize boycott in order to get there. We have a chance to do something, not to talk about petty notions of an empty resolution, but to take the situation into our own hands under the leadership of Palestinians in true solidarity, to take concrete steps towards realizing justice, peace, and a full equality for all citizens in the region. Do not take this lightly. Go to the Student Guild and with your heart shining say yes to boycott of Israeli settlement products. Then go find your flatmates and your closest friends and your classmates and implore them to do the same. Incredibly important. This is the least we can do in this day, at this hour, to finally act. So thanks.